Let me just say that this shiur sort of happened to me in the course of the last couple of days. You don't have to take notes because you're going to get a copy of it, it turns out, an outline of it on Jafter after it's over, because I said to write it out to share it with some alumni and some other friends. So it's a collection of texts, and we will start with וספרתם ממחרת השבת, and come back to it after a long and involved detour. Mitzvah ספירת העומר. וספרתם ממחרת השבת. Of course, in the Bible, it has nothing to do with Pesach, right? It's counting the days to an agricultural holiday called Shavuot. Remember, Shavuot has nothing to do with Matan Torah in the Torah. And it doesn't necessarily begin at Pesach. It says, וספרתם ממחרת השבת. But exactly what that Shabbat is, what that means, it's miyom haviachem et omar atnufa. In Dvarim, it has this wonderful phrase, מהחל חרמש בקמה. When from the day when the sickle first touches the produce. In other words, it's a beautifully graphic way of saying the very beginning of the harvest. Charamesh B'kama, you begin counting. In the list of holidays, it comes right after Pesach. So that's why the rabbi somehow linked it. But in fact, in the biblical text, it has nothing to do with Pesach. It's this 50-day period, or this period of weeks from the beginning of the harvest. The rabbis, of course, tied it to Pesach. They used it to tie Pesach and Shavuot together. And I think that's part of the much bigger rabbinic project of creating Shavuot as Man Matan Toratenu. Remember, that link is not there. It says, B'chodesh hashlishi letzet Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, v'yom hazeh midbar Sinai. That could mean Sivan, it actually could mean Tammuz, B'chodesh hashlishi. Not clear when it happened. There is no date for Matan Torah in the Torah. But the rabbis, of course, make it Man Matan Toratenu, and remember, the rabbis are creating a new religion. It's a new religion. After Churban HaBayit, there is this great crisis, and they create a religion based around Torah. Matan Torah is the great event in the history of the world. Everything points to everything leads up to Matan Torah, everything comes from Matan Torah. That's the day when eternity enters into time and time is transformed. That's why every Jew was ever to be born, become Jewish, was there at Sinai. All the souls were there because it somehow was the great transformative event. In teaching, some of you have heard me do this. I often compare the two successor religions to Israelite religion that were born at the same time, Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism. They were born in the same moment, just before Churban HaBayit, but they both got their real strength from the crisis of Churban HaBayit. That's what drove both of them, really. And I want to say that they, in a very parallel way, have a central intermediary figure, Christ in Christianity, Torah in Rabbinic Judaism, and a parallel two ways of relating to God through that intermediary figure. In Christianity, it becomes, of course, the Eucharist and faith, the two ways of taking Christ into yourself, through the ingestion in the Eucharist or through faith. And in Rabbinic Judaism, it's Torah and mitzvot. Mitzvah is the same thing, sort of you acting upon, because it's a teaching, not a person. Acting upon it, it's the sacrament. The mitzvah is the sacrament, as the Kabbalists came to declare, but really understood well, I would say. Mitzvot are sacraments. They're the sacramental moments in which you encounter God, and then our act of faith is the act of study, so it becomes Torah and mitzvot, and that really becomes the center of rabbinic religion. So this creation of Shavuot as the sort of high point in the Jewish liturgical year, and therefore Pesach, which is the big celebrated holiday already in biblical times, clearly. As far as the Tanakh is concerned, there are two important holidays, Pesach and Yom Kippur. Those are the ones that are described at great length. And Yom Kippur is primarily described as a priest's holiday. That's what the Kohen does Yom Kippur in such detail. Pesach is the holiday that people do in such detail. So it clearly was already the great festival, but they made it preparatory. They made it. It's coming. It comes to set you on the road to Shavuot. I want to suggest that part of the reason they're doing this is they want to tame Pesach somehow. Pesach can be a little bit wild. Man cherutenu. I used to be a slave. I used to be under somebody else's control. Now I'm free. I can do whatever I want. I can go wild, right? I have my freedom now. I think that was a little bit dangerous for the rabbis. They wanted us, after all, to be avadim lamakom. We are no longer avadim leparo, but we are avadim lamakom. Now, even though they said ben, they said b'ni b'chari Yisrael, right there at the time of Yitzhak Mitzrayim, but still, im kivanim, im kavadim, you remember those two sides of the relationship with God. The Eved side, meaning the sort of devotional surrender side, yes, Kabbalat ol malchut shamayim, the Eved is mekabel ol. That's very important to the rabbis. And so Pesach was a little too free for them. Zman Cherutenu becomes a preparatory Cherut for Charut al-Haluchot, Cherut al-Haluchot. That's the freedom the rabbis really cared about. That was their freedom. Yes, remember, Charut al-Haluchot, al tikra, Charut el-Cherut. It's the luchot, it's commitment. It's the commitment to the luchot that gives you real freedom. And I think that's in some ways what they were trying to do. Over time, those connections are made even deeper and more mythical. There are 49 Sha'arei Tum'ah, or there are 50 Sha'arei Tum'ah in the world. In Mitzrayim, we were sunk down to the 49th Sha'ar of the Hamishim Sha'arei Tum'ah. Had we gone one more step down, we would have been irredeemable. And there are, surprise, Hamishim Sha'arei Bina Nitnu Ba'olam. And all the Sha'arei Bina Moshe Rabbeinu received except the 50th, because that's full knowledge of God, and no human being can have that. So 50 gates, their gates are measures, depending on how you translate Sha'ar, their gates are measures of Tumah, 50 gates are measures of Bina. Guess what? There are 50 days in between Pesach and Shavuot. And those days are compared by the Zohar in several places, and all the later literature picks it up. Those 7 weeks are compared to the Safra Shiva Nichiyim. Those are like the 7 days you count after menstruation before a woman goes to the mikveh. So it's a period of preparation from your tum'ah. So it's heavy-duty mythical stuff. This connection between Pesach is given sort of a mythical and even sort of psychosexual sort of drama in later Judaism, especially in Kabbalah, but that spreads from Kabbalah into popular preaching. You see it a lot in the later literature. So what is this about? What's this all about? This taming, this linking of the two festivals. I think it lies in the rabbinic understanding of what freedom is, and the relationship between freedom and responsibility. Look at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Yes, the Constitution comes only, 20 years after the Declaration, 15 years after the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence, the bonds have to be rent asunder. And the bonds are rent asunder, we break through, we break out, so we can pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, I might pursue happiness by killing some loyalist civilians. I might find happiness in all kinds of ways. If I'm pursuit of happiness is what I'm about. Remember the French Revolution and how wild it went in the sort of orgy of bloodletting that happened in France. Remember the Haitian Revolution, where they turned around and killed the landowners, killed the slaveholders in very brutal and frightening ways that scared the Caribbean societies for centuries to come. The Americans know within 20 years they're creating a constitution. They're creating a sort of rule of law, which is to say the journey from Yitziat Mitzrayim to Matan Torah. I'm saying they're doing very quickly and very completely. However imperfect that rule of law is. ... Democracy, rule of law. I don't have to tell you how many people were excluded, how many categories were excluded, and so on and so on. Look at 2 other revolutions we have known. 2 other, not revolutions, but liberation movements we have known that are very, very much in our minds. You can't be an American and think about liberation and slavery now, of course, without thinking about the African American experience. And it's been so much more front and center for the last 3 years or so. Since Trayvon Martin, I guess, it's been constantly front and center in our consciousness as Americans. There's not a day that goes by without some reminder of America's original sin, that we have not overcome the original sin on which this country was founded. It's just astounding how regular a part of our consciousness that's become. So there was an attempt called Reconstruction to go from the liberation of the slaves to giving them responsibility and building a responsible society. Unfortunately, in contrast to what the spiritual says, Pharaoh's army had not gotten drowned. And they came back in the form of the Ku Klux Klan. And then they came back in the form of Jim Crow. And then they still come back in the new Jim Crow, and then the versions of Jim Crow that still happen, whether it's incarceration or poverty or lack of education or lack of opportunity. That is a liberation movement that has been struggling. You can't call it a success. I wouldn't call it a successful liberation movement. It's a liberation movement that's been in very big trouble since the emancipation of the slaves. It has not worked out the way it was supposed to. I mean, you listen to Martin Luther King and seeing the promised land. And where is the promised land, and how much farther will it be to get to the promised land? And the promised land is, in some ways, I think, the promised land of a Matan Torah, which is to say a stable and responsible society where people can earn a living, where people can contribute to society. That's certainly what he wanted, and that would be the kind of bringing it into the Constitution phase. And it hasn't happened because of all kinds of powers that want to disempower. I want to look at another liberation movement, a much more successful liberation movement. That's the gay liberation movement of the last couple of decades. It's been an incredible movement that we have been privileged to see in our lifetimes. And the move very quickly from coming out of the closet to seeking marriage rights was a very interesting move. I don't think it had to go that way. But seeking marriage, of course, and making gay marriage the fulcrum of it, the focus of it, meant responsibility, meant the connection between sex, love, and responsibility, and building family and building home. I think some of it happened, of course, because of the terrible price paid in the AIDS epidemic, which brought a tremendous sense of responsibility and caring to the gay community that it might not have had without that. And that sort of led to the focus becomes marriage, and I think that's why I think full support for gay marriage is such an essential religious value. I just find any shred of religious opposition to it kind of just morally blinded, not understanding it, because it's precisely a successful liberation movement in bringing people to recognizing that Tzelem Elohim in one another, and the rest of us recognizing and creating responsible community. So all that is by way of introduction. That's the introductory part, because what I really want to talk about is the opposite. I'm saying this move is the classic rabbinic move. Tie Pesach to Shavuot. Tie liberation to responsibility. Responsible society is what you're supposed to create. That's why the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah, to create responsible society. But there is another strand within the tradition that's different than that. And it's that other strand that I'm really most interested in today. Ra'ata shivcha al hayam ma shelo ra'u Yeshayahu v'Yechezkel. Line from Memachelta. If you've had classical Judaism, Jewish thought with me, you've seen that line. Again, Ra'ata shivcha al hayam ma shelo ra'u Yeshayahu v'Yechezkel. Kriyat Yam Suf is the great moment of revelation, not Matan Torah. It's not Ra'ata shivcha b'Sinai. It's Ra'ata shivcha al hayam. It's very interesting that it's a shivcha. Why a shivcha? Why a shivcha? It's an interesting feminine choice of image. Because Yisrael are the shivcha nechrefet. Yisrael sees itself as the shivcha who's just been brought out of Mitzrayim. Remember, the Bnei HaShivcha were killed in Makat Bekorot, the Egyptian shpachot. But Israel sees itself as a shivcha. But it's very interesting, partly precisely because of the misogyny of the tradition. A shivcha is the person who is least likely to be educated. There's no Torah here. There's no requirement of learning to see God at the sea, to see more than Isaiah and Ezekiel. Isaiah and Ezekiel, remember, are the two prophets who saw the most, other than Moshe Rabbeinu. They're the two Kedusha prophets, yes? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh is Yeshayahu's vision, and Baruch Kvod Hashem Yimkovo is Yechezkel's vision. We recite them every day. Those are the visionary moments. So the Shivcha al Hayam saw more than they did, and without any Torah, because she's a Shivcha, probably illiterate, right? We didn't let her near Torah. So that the Shivcha is a symbol of the most ordinary person at the sea, the person with the least learning at the sea, still saw more than Yeshaya v'Yechezkel. Now we go to our first text. This is also the framing of this group of texts. This is from Shir HaShirim Rabbah. If we had 3 hours, I would give you a root of time to prepare them yourselves. You know, it wouldn't work that way. But that's okay. Apiryo Nasalo HaMelech Shlomo. Who'd like to read a little bit of text?
The top right where it says Tetvav?
Yes, this is Shir HaShirim Rabbah Gimel Tetvav.
Apiryon Asalo, Rabbi Azariah b'Shem Rabbi.
Apiryon Asalo is this is a pavilion that the king makes on his wedding day. Yeah.
Rabbi Azariah b'Shem Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Simon Petar Kraya b'Mishkan.
Said this passage refers to the Mishkan.
Apiryon is the Mishkan. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eli lemelech shaytalo bat ktana. Ad shelo higdila ubat lidei simanim.
That is to say, before she reached maturity, before she reached physical maturity.
היה רואה אותה בשוק ומדבר עמה בפרהסיה במבוי ובחצר.
Keep going.
כיוון שהגדילה ובאת לידי סימנין, אמר המלך, אין שפחה של ביתי שהם מדבר עמה בפרהסיה. אלא אסור לה...
It wouldn't be proper anymore, you know. As long as she was a child, I could speak to her in the street or in the marketplace. But now that she's a young woman, that would not be lefi kvodah. So therefore...
אלא אסור לה הפיליון.
Pavilion.
ושיהיה צריך לדבר עמה מתוך הפפיליון. כך כתיב כי נער ישראל
ואוהבהו. Now we switch genders, but all right, Yisrael was a na'ar, and I loved him. I love Yisrael as a na'ar publicly, because a na'ar you can love anywhere.
במצרים ראו אותו בפרהסיה, שנאמר ועבר אדוני לנגוף את מצרים. בים ראו אותו בפרהסיה, שנאמר וירא ישראל את היד הגדולה. והיו העוללים מראים אותו באצבען ואומרים זה
אלי וענווהו. That's אלי וענווהו. That's that guy, being, whatever you want to say right over there. זה אלי וענווהו. The kids would point with their fingers and say זה אלי וענווהו at the ים.
בסיני ראו אותו פנים בפנים, שנאמר ויאמר אדוני מסיני בא וגומר. כיוון שעבדו ישראל על הר סיני וקיבלו את התורה ואמרו כל אשר דיבר אדוני נעשה ונשמע, נעשה לו אומה שלמה.
Meaning they reached maturity, just like this bat who grew up.
אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אין שפחן של בני שיהיה מדבר עמם בפרהסיה, אלא יעשו לי משכן. כשאני צריך לדבר עמהם, אהיה מדבר עמהם מתוך המשכן.
So this text comes to explain what?
Why we need a Mishkan.
Why we need the Mishkan, but also why there was more direct religious experience before the Mishkan. Yes? Now that we've reached maturity, God has to hide from us a little bit. God has to give us the privacy of making the Mishkan, but it's also explaining in some ways why God is hidden, or why we don't see God the way we seemingly saw God in the moment of those great miracles. Because we are the Bat Bogeret, and the Bat Bogeret is to be treated with a little more derech eretz, and not just be talked to by her father in the streets. You've got to picture a society that's more like Iran than like Boston today. But that's probably, I imagine an Iranian would understand this very well. That you just don't approach a mature woman on the street and talk to her because it's not lefi kvodah.
I'm really glad you mentioned the word privacy, as I've often thought I didn't even see that value in very many rabbinic texts. But the answer is that God is hidden for the sake of privacy with the implicit intimacy. There's a closeness there.
Yes.
And hence a kind of sheltering container.
Yeah. We're looking at Eved v'Shivcha and Ben Uvat, right, as modes of relationship between person and God. So, right, so the Shivcha on the one hand is the most simple person, and as I said, the rabbis want to maintain that Eved Shivcha side of things, but there's also this very intimate the father-daughter relationship here. Yeah, there's also this very intimate sort of relationship, and at the same time respect for privacy. Then?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure this out. In the Nimshal, what happened to Bnei Yisrael at Har Sinai that made them mature to the point where it would be inappropriate to be talking to God openly?
They said Na'aseh v'nishma. That's what it says.
Right.
And there was something in the Na'aseh v'nishma that this made them adults. This made them responsible citizens, right? There's this whole theme of the Constitution of responsibility. They are now taking on adult responsibility. Okay, you're grown up, so I can't talk to you like a child anymore. I think that's the sense I get out of it. So from there, I want to go to another text in just a second. But yeah, so some of you have, if you've had classical Jewish thought with me, maybe another class, you read my article on Bachur al Hayam Zaken b'Sinai, that God appears to Bnei Yisrael at different times in different ways. So Bayam nira lehem k'Bachur b'Sinai nira lehem k'Zaken, but they're both appearances, and the appearance at the Yam is somehow a very direct and powerful one. But we also have in Haggadah itself, Uvemora Gadol, in the verse, remember the whole Haggadah narrative is built around this verse from Parshat Ki Tavo, which in the Torah was what you say on what occasion? Bikurim. It's the vidui bikurim. It's what you say, Arami oved aviv v'yered Mitzrayim v'yisham l'goy gadol, and so on. That's what you say when you bring the bikurim. The rabbinic genius was in makom lechan. Since we no longer bring bikurim, use that pasuk for something else, and that pasuk becomes the basis for the midrash around which the Haggadah is constructed. So one phrase in that verse says, "Uv'mora gadol," "V'yosenu Hashem Mitzrayim b'yad chazaka v'mora gadol," and Haggadah says, "V'mora gadol zo gilui shchina." V'mora gadol zo gilui shchina. So there's a gilui shchina, there's a revelation of the shchina in Mitzrayim. God takes us out revealing inner revelation of the shchina. Remember, ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo saraf, right? God himself does it. Why? Makat b'chorot, the malach hamavos could do, right? And he's called, in the Torah text, he's even called the mashchit, lo yavo hamashchit. So if it's just to kill Egyptians, God could send a malach. But Israel have to experience God in that moment. There also has to be a revelation of God, which is separate from the miracles, I would say, which is separate from the makot. There is Gilui Shechina is a separate event. I read in Ezrat Avotenu, I read it the same way. It says the Egyptians, you killed the Egyptians, Echad mehem lo notar. And then it says, Al Zot Shibchu Giluim, Al Zot. I take to mean Gilui Shechina. It wasn't about the killing of the Egyptians. Zot in the feminine doesn't really make sense there. It wasn't the killing of the Egyptians, it wasn't splitting the sea, but Al Zot. It's the Zot of Zot Komatech Dam Tala Tamar. It's the Zot of Bezot Yavo Aron Al HaKodesh. Zot is always the kinui for the Shechina in Kabbalah. So Al Zot Shibchu Alavim, this revelation of the Shechina that took place Al Hayam. So these are miraculous events, not only, or for me, not so much, because nature has changed. I'm not a literal believer in that kind of miracle, as you know, but the point of the miracle is that there is a Gilui Shechina there, which is to say this event was experienced in such a way that they encountered the presence of God.
Yet Israel was not mature.
Yeah, they were not mature yet.
That's interesting, because with the daughter, she just jumps from being a Ketana to having Simanim.
Right.
But yet,
Here she is still not mature.
Stages, but yet we're not mature, right? In Kriyat Yam Suf, we're not mature.
Not until Sinai, not until Na'aseh v'nishma somehow. Yeah. Okay, so now take a look at a Hasidic comment on the Haggadah. This is the Tiferet Shlomo Mirodomsk, a later Hasidic master, on this phrase Umura Gadol. Very beautifully done comment. Umura Gadol ze Gilui Shechina. This is a very strange abbreviation. I think it's Katav She'er B'Sari. But Nehemiah, if you have another idea, I'll be happy to hear it. I think a relative of mine wrote, otherwise I don't understand.
Katav She'er B'Sari.
Katav She'er B'Sari. You think that's what it is? You agree?
Yeah.
Okay, so my relative wrote this. Migodel Kedushat Laila Zot, Asher Hashem Yitbarach Kivyachol Mitdabek Im Kol Echad Ve'echad Mibnei Yisrael. This is the Umura Gadol, was the great holiness of this night when God, you never see this phrase. We seek dveikut with God, but God is mitdavek. God chooses to be intimate with every single one of Israel. Kemo shekatuv kechatzot halayla ani yotzei betoch Mitzrayim. Now kechatzot halayla is around midnight, yes? And there are all kinds of midrashim about why does it say bechatzot? Why does it say kechatzot? So he reads it this way. Ki bechol chatzot layla Hashem Yitbarach nichnas began Eden l'ishtashay im tzadikim, kemo she'amru b'zohar hakadosh al pasuk ve'amelech shav miginata bitan. Every night at midnight, God goes down into Gan Eden to delight with the souls of the tzadikim. That's what God does. He plays with the souls of the tzadikim. L'ishtashay has a kind of playful image about it. So he goes to delight, to play with the souls of the tzaddikim, as the Zohar says on this pasuk, which really comes from where? Esther. Comes from Esther, of course, the Berach Hashverosh, but the whole of Esther is, the whole description of the palace in Esther is read by the Zohar as really a description of the divine palace. This is what the divine palaces must also be like. So the king is coming back from the garden of the palace. That's God comes back from Gan Eden, where he's been playing with the tzaddikim at night. So now he says, Kechatzot, just like I do there, just like I do every night, delight with the souls of the tzaddikim, ach balayla zot, balayla hazeh it should be, of course, eino nichnas leGan Eden, rak betoch b'nei Yisrael hosim retzonon, b'mitzvot hanugim balayla zot. So on Pesach night, he chooses not, he doesn't go to Gan Eden to play with the tzaddikim. He comes down to play with us. And he did it that first Pesach, he did it kechatzot, he said kechatzot, laila ani yored b'toch Mitzrayim. So I'm going to go down in Egypt and redeem Bnei Israel instead of playing with the tzaddikim that night. And he liked it so much, he does it every year. So God comes down and sort of delights in us the same way, kechatzot, the same way he does with the souls of the tzaddikim in Gan Eden. Haoskim b'mitzvot hanugim b'layla zot, b'achilat matzah, as we eat the matzah, as we tell the story, God is there delighting with us. So that's the Gilui Shechina. The Gilui Shechina really happens every Pesach because God comes down like he did in Egypt. So that sense of constancy, that sense that Yetziat Mitzrayim is always repeated, and that the event happens again. Turn the page and take a look at one more little Hasidic piece from the Haggadah. This is the Sfas Emes. The two are published together. You very well in the Sfas Emes. And the Sfas Emes says, this is toward the end of the Haggadah. We have Psalm 136, Halel Hagadol. And that's the Kilo Olam Hasdosal. One of the lines in it is, Lo seni flaot gedolot levado. Kilo Olam Hasdo. ובזוהר הקדוש בלק, פרש, שהקדוש ברוך הוא עושה נס לאדם, ואינו מודיע לשום בריאה. God performs miracles for people and doesn't tell anybody. רק הוא לבדו יודע. Only God knows. לא עושה נפלאות גדולות לבדו. Only God knows how big the miracle really is. הרי נחש בא לנשכו, ונפל אבן על הנחש, והורגו. So what happened? The snake came to bite you, and a rock fell down on the snake's head and killed the snake. There's your miracle. Okay, so you see that miracle. You know that miracle happened, but you don't know the dimensions of that miracle. You can't look at all the future generations of your descendants who will exist because that miracle happened. You won't know what you might accomplish later in your life that is made possible because of that moment. So the consciousness of God, which has past, present, and future all there, can see dimensions of events that we can never see. So we only see a little bit of it. ויש לומר כי הנפלאות שעשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לכללות ישראל, הגם כי ראו אותם, they did see them. מכל מקום הוא לבדו יודע גודל הנפלאות, כי הם לדורות. Only God knows how big the miracle is, because the result of this miracle goes on for all generations. וזה שכתוב כי לעולם חסדו. So look at the blessing again, לא עושה נפלאות גדולות לבדו, כי לעולם חסדו. God alone knows how great the miracle is because His chesed is eternal, because His chesed goes across all of time. אלה הנפלאות יש להם פירות, תמיד. These נפלאות are always bearing fruit. כמו שאמרו, בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות עצמו כאילו הוא יצא. וכתיב, ואותנו הוציא משם. So that's the constant renewal. ולכן מצווין לזכור יציאת מצרים בכל יום. It's one of the things you're supposed to mention every day, remember every day. כי הגאולה של מצרים מתחדש בכל יום תמיד. ובכל נפש ונפש מישראל בפרט. Very, very clear, direct statement of this spiritualizing of Yetziat Mitzrayim. It happens constantly, and happens in every individual soul. והכל היה נכלל באותן נפלאות, והוא לבדו יודע, כי אין להם חקר, כי לעולם חסדו. So God's chesed is beyond cheker. How do you say cheker? Beyond inquiry, beyond the possibility of, beyond our possibility of inquiry, our possibility of understanding. So I'm pointing to two distinct directions within the tradition. One that says Yetziat Mitzrayim is just preparatory. The real Chirut is the Chirut of the Luchot. Don't get too excited about Mitzrayim. Don't get too excited about Yetziat Mitzrayim. Remember, it's all for the purpose of Sinai. That's really what's important. Count the days, it's all there. And the other says, wait a minute, let's stop and rejoice. We just got liberated from slavery. We were slaves, and we're out now, and that is a sacred moment in itself. Zman Cherotenu Mikra Kodesh. The moment of liberation calls us to holiness. Mikra Kodesh. Yes, Mikra calls us. There's something about Zman Cherotenu that itself calls us, reveals itself as a holy moment. It's not just about getting on the way. Now, I want to take this dichotomy, preparation and legitimate moment, sacred moment in itself, and put it on top of another dichotomy we know pretty well. Alan Lehman just gave a wonderful Dvar Torah about this at the Dominion of Shabbos, by the way. The Machloket of Rav and Shmuel about Potchin Bignai. You remember we're told about the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of the Haggadah is of course the Sacher, and the Tanaim had already decided Potchin Bignai Uvesaymin Bishvach. You begin with saying something bad. Gnai is like shameful. You begin saying something bad and you wind up saying something praiseworthy. And then Rav says the Gnai is Avadim Hayinu, and Shmuel says the Gnai is Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah Yoavatenu. And of course, like Judaism often does, we do both, and that's why the Haggadah is so long. But Alan reminded me that what this is about is the two readings of the Seder, and the two kinds of conversations we have at so many of our Seder. Is this a political story, or is this a spiritual story? If it's Avadim Hayinu, then it's a political story. It's about political liberation. We were enslaved, and we got out of slavery. And Rabbi Akiva and his friends in Bnei Brak were up all night because they were planning the Bar Kokhba rebellion, right? And think of all those Siddharim where it's really about freedom. I mean, the Israeli Seder is really about Yetziat Auschwitz which becomes the new Yetziat Mitzrayim. So many American Jewish Seder's are about, remember the stories of our ancestors coming to America. Tell us the story about how your grandfather came to America. And of course, now you have Siddharam, which are going to be about Black Lives Matter and immigration issues. And I remember the Vietnam era Siddharam, where we were very much concerned with the war and justice and things like that. Those are all, in a very broad sense. Pesach is a story about liberation, about political freedom. And then there is the Shmuel, who says, no, it's not about Avodim Yinu, it's about Mitchila Odeh Avodah Zarah. It's about, we used to worship idols, so let's talk about what are the idols in our lives, and how do we overcome idolatry, and how do we have a more pure kind of faith, and how we made the journey, or how are we making the journey from whatever our Avodah Zarah is to overcoming our Avodah Zarah. Remember, the Seder begins with this amazing declaration. It always shocks me, and I often begin my Seder by talking about this. The narrative begins, Avadim Hayinu L'Parov Mitzrayim. If we sing the sort of modern Israeli, somebody composed version, we do Avadim Hayinu Ata B'nei Chorim. Yes, now we are free. But before that we say, Hashata Avdei L'Shana Ha'aba B'nei Chorim. This year we are slaves. Next year may we be free. Which is to say, we admit that we're not really free. And here we are celebrating, this whole land is about celebrating freedom. And guess what, as we invite the guest in, we say, we are slaves. We're not really free. Next year, maybe we be free. And I think the Seder, the Haggadah lives in the tension between those two moments. Between celebrating, which you have to celebrate the reality of freedom, and, someday may we be free. And how we manage that tension. It's sort of like Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, and then Vayoma Hu Yeh Hashem Echad, is that living in the tension between those two. I think we give the tension around that. So now, overlaying this on that conversation, you understand what I'm saying? That if it's political, it can also be, yes, do we celebrate the freedom, the liberation of coming out of Egypt? Or do we say, no, it's not complete yet because we haven't built our responsible society? If it's spiritual, do we celebrate this freedom? Or do we say, no, we haven't really come before Sinai and opened our hearts and accepted the Torah? And both work in both of those contexts. And in some ways, of course, you need both. Right? You need the legitimacy of this moment. God is right here, present in this moment of my liberation. Yay, team! And it's a long, hard journey. I'm just beginning on the journey to liberation. So now, the next text is, how do you say that in Jewish language? How do you say that we need both of those in classical Jewish language? Here's something from, everyone knows this well because we did this in Speaking Torah. It's from a commentary on the Haggadah called Pri Chaim by Rabbi Avram Chaim Mizlochev, good friend of Levi Yitzchak and part of that same circle of the Maggid. And somebody from Shana Bet, help read this, because you just prepared this. Allison, go ahead, start it off. This is the Shelat HaChacham with this very strange answer, right? You tell him, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen. Go aheed.
צריך להבין בחיזה כל הלכות פסח ודיני הפסח, הלא זה הדין אחר אכילת הפסח. This is the most important thing to tell him. Kehilchot HaPesach, you tell him about the Afikomen. There's not a lot of stuff about Dinei Pesach to tell him. איתו בסידור האריזל, למה נקרא פסח לשון דיבלוג וקפיצה שהיה אז גדולות קודם לקטנות עד כאן.
Okay, so he said, the Arizal, why is it called Pesach? Because Pesach means poseach, the daleg, to skip over something. So you skipped over in that moment, haya gadlut kodem lekaplut. There was gadlut before kaplut. Gadlut, he's talking about now in the Hasidic reading of Loria, he's talking about different states of consciousness. That was a moment that blew our minds. That was a moment of gadlut. according to the Kabbalist, Bina comes down. Bina is the highest element within God that you can reach. It's beyond all 49 gates. It's the 50th gate itself that came down and liberated us. So we reached the 50th gate. We were right there at the highest place. Gadlut, we had sort of expanded minds, and we saw God directly. We saw everything. That's the Gilui Shekhinah. And that happened before Katnut. As soon as we liberated, we had immediate Gadlut. The Shamati, somebody else pick up? Volunteers? Okay. Go ahead.
ושמעתי מהרב בצינה.
Utsina Kadisha, that's the great lamp, that's a classic title for Hasidic redders.
בצינה קדישה מורנו הרב אברהם זכרונו לברכה בן הרב ובצינה קדישה הרב המגיד מורנו הרב דוד
Right, this is the Magid son of Avraham said the following.
והנה האדם צריך לתקן 7 מידותיו, אהבה, יראה, התפארת, בכל מידה ומידה ופרטותיה, שיהיה להשם לבדו.
You have to work on yourself. You have to go through your midot. There are 7 midot. There's the 7 lower sphirot. Those are the 7 midot. If you have a sphira calendar, you know Chesed is the first week, Gvura is the second week, Tiferet is the third week, and so on. You have to go step by step taking care of your midot.
שלא יאהב רק להשם יתברך לבדו ודומיהן, שלא ישתמש.
That's right. So the first week is Chesed. So you should love only God. That's what love is for love of God, and so on through the weeks. שלא ישתמש.
שלא ישתמש לשום הנאת הגוף בשום מידה רק להשם יתברך לבדו.
So these midot were not given to you for physical pleasure, but only to serve God. בכל מידה.
בכל מידה כולן משווה, והן 4 ו9 פרטיות, ואחר כך שורה עליו שער ה-50 שערי בינה.
Right, so you go through all 49 stages. These are the days of Sfirot. The days of Sfira are Tikkun HaMidot. You go through each one of the 7 contains 7. That's how you get 49. And then finally you come to the 50th. But at Yetziat Mitzrayim, they came immediately to the 50th gate. They were right on top. Amor, how do we know this? Because it says, of course, וחמישים עלו בני ישראל מארץ מצרים. Right? They were there. They were all 50 when they came out of Mitzrayim. Never mind what else it might mean. Oh, hayahanes. The nes was right there. כמו שנאמר בזוהר. ותכף ממחרת הפסח נלקח מהם ההרה הזאת. But then, right after Pesach, the day after Pesach, נלקח מהם. Now this enlightenment was taken away from them. They got this big zap of moment of seeing God, moment of being in Bina, moment of being at the 50th gate, but then right away it was taken away from them. וציוותם לספור ספירת העומר ממתת יום, כדי לתקן כל מידה ומידה בפרטות, ויבואו בחג השבועות ל50 שערי בינה. So you get the zap, but then you have to do the work. Right? You get the zap first, you get the moment of enlightenment, but then you lose that, and then you have to begin at the bottom step and go up 7 times 7 all the way up to the Tikkun HaMidot until you get back. Let me finish the paragraph. ויעבור בחג השבועות ל50 שערי בינה ונמצא היה ביציאת מצרים גדלות קודם קטנות. עד כאן דבריו. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, maybe it's going to get an answer. I'm still holding the question. I know you said that we need both. We need the celebration and then we need the journey, but this Josh is leaving me with the question of why. What's the purpose of the gadlut first? If we're going to lose it the next day and begin the journey, then what's the point of the zap?
Well, give us an answer.
I mean, honestly, I guess I just don't believe, I guess my answer would be that we don't really lose that enlightenment, that zap. But that seems to be...
I would say we do lose it, but it's what gives us hope. The fact that we have seen a flash of it, we've had a taste of it, somehow gives us hope that there's something to get to. Otherwise, I think the journey would be just too plodding. How do I know? Here I am in level 3 of step 1, and I'm working hard to get to level 4. Is this taking me anywhere? Is anything really going to happen? Am I ever going to get anywhere? And the idea that you had a moment where you saw it already. You've been to the top of the mountain. and know that it's regaining something that you've had some kind of flash insight of. I think that makes all the difference. To me, that makes all the difference. Yeah, please.
I think maybe we get the death, so that we know that we have to do the work, and the work is to spread the Omer.
That's right. That's what you're saying. Yeah, we get it. You see, Mitzrayim, and then we have to do it. Yeah. So now, of course, he's got to say, what does this have to do with Ein Mafrin Achar Pesach Afikomen? Hine ita sha'avot kimu haTorah ad shelo nitna. That's a theme you find all over the place. The Avot fulfilled the Torah before it was given. V'Yaakov Avinu haya meniach tefillin b'maklot. What Yaakov Avinu was doing with the sticks, putting the sticks on the speckled and spotted, that was his tefillin. That was how he was worshiping God that way. That was his tefillin. Rotzeh lomar shekimu pnimiyut haTorah b'uvdot acherim. They fulfill the innermost nature of Torah by other deeds, not by tefillin, but by doing other things. Ve'einam mitzamtzim ka'asher haTorah etzlenu b'tzimtzumim v'shiurim. In a certain sense, this is a Buber text, right? You can serve God through any actions. The actions of the Avot, they didn't have mitzvot yet, they didn't have forms, but in every deed they did, in their ordinary deeds, they were serving God the same way we do with the mitzvot. Okay, so the Chacham is asking, what do we need the forms for? What do we need the mitzvot for? We have been there, we've seen it, we've been to the top of the mountain. Do we really need all the details? You guys, you people of institutional religion, of organized religion, who have all these commandments. What do we need them for? Do I need those? He sees himself as a person of expanded consciousness. He's in gadlut gedolah. He has a big mind for Pesach. What do we need the forms for? Why is the Torah so small, so reduced into these forms? Nitzamtzem as opposed to his gadlut, which is beyond tzimtzum, right? He is why is it so concentrated in these forms? Asher tzivah Hashem, ki yecholim l'chayim pnimiyut haTorah b'uvdot acherim, kimu ha'avot shekimu haTorah ad shelo nitna. Hey, we could do that too. Worship God through any kind of forms that we have. But this is Hasidism, has to be an answer to that challenge, obviously. Now you tell him Hilchot HaPesach. Rotzeh lomar emor lo halachot v'ta'am shel Pesach. Shelama nikra Pesach, al shem he'erad gadlut kodem lekatnut. It's called Pesach because it's the gadlut before the katnut. It's the dilug, remember. The Ari said it's you skip over all the katnut and you get to that gadlut right away. Al kein ein maftirin. Rotzeh lomar l'shon patur, but you're not patur. That moment of gadlut doesn't make you free, doesn't release you from all the obligations. Rotzeh lomar einanu maftirim mimaaseh hamitzvot v'chukim asher tzivah Hashem yitbarach b'tzimtzumim mishum she'achar haPesach afikoman. We're not free to do away with all the forms and just say, well, we have that moment, because achar haPesach afikoman. Rotzeh lomar achar haPesach, after Pesach is gone, tilakach hitgalut ha'ara harishona, the gadlut. This ha'ara harishona is going to be taken away from you. It's not going to last. V'zeu apiku man. Ki halechem ha'yored min hashamayim nikra man. So the manna disappears. The manna is going to disappear. Apiku is lahotzi. V'techa v'achar haPesach tilakach ha'ara zu the gadlut. V'tiyeh b'katnut hasechel. You will have your own little small mind back. V'nitzarech l'maaseh hamitzvot v'chukim kimo she'em ata mitzumtzamim. So this isn't going to last. This moment was a great gift to you, but it's not going to last, and you're going to have to struggle like the rest of us, and come down from the mountaintop and start at the beginning and go step by step. So these two visions again. Pesach as preparation for Shavuot, step by step. Pesach as, wow, the great moment in itself, liberation is transformative, it's all I need. So I'll wind up, come to near the end by being a good Jewish diasporist, and by saying, well, that's why we have two Siddharim. We have an advantage, right? We have an advantage. The first night is pure celebration, pure freedom, pure liberation. We can rejoice in that. It's on the second night that we begin to count Sfirat. ממחרת השבת. It's on the second night, so then we say, okay, now I have to begin the journey to really work on myself and be ready to create the kind of community I believe in, the kind of values I believe in, the kind of Torah I believe in. So one final thing I would say, that's why the first day of Pesach is referred to in this pasuk as Shabbat. Memachrat Shabbat. Why? Because on Shabbat, we are not allowed to worry that we're not there yet. On Shabbat, we have everything we need. Right? So one last little bit of text from my very favorite guy in this Hasidic world, the Oreinayim, who tells us about Shabbat. Why can't they build the Mishkan on Shabbat? You remember, all the laws of Shabbat come from the Mishkan. And it says, Achat Shabtatay Tishmoru Lema'et Melechet HaMishkan. Look where I marked it down below. Ve'omnam Lo Levad Melechet Hedyot Asur B'Shabbat. Not only ordinary people's work, idiotic work you might say, is forbidden on Shabbat. Ach afilu Melechet HaMishkan Ratzah Lomar Mishkan Nikra Al Shem V'Shachanti B'toch B'nei Yisrael. Mishkan really means that which makes God dwell within you. Shakadosh Baruch Hu Shochen B'toch B'nei Yisrael. He's spiritualizing Mishkan entirely now. It's not about the structure in the desert. It's about God being Shochen B'toch B'nei Yisrael. V'adam tzarich liot Mishkan elav. You have to become a Mishkan for God. V'im lo tahor hu mechala'at avonotav. And if you're impure because of your sins, u'ma'akev hashrat shchinato Baruch Hu, and this keeps the Shekhinah from dwelling in you. B'Shabbat yasir milibo gam daran zeh. On Shabbos, get that out of your mind too. Do not think about that on Shabbos, that you were inadequate to house the presence of God. Shelo ya'atzev al zeh. Don't be sad about it. You're not allowed to be sad about it on Shabbat. Rak yishmor Shabbat k'ilchato v'yismach b'Hashem yitbarach. Just keep Shabbos with joy. Shulafanav hu rav v'rav in the simcha, because in God's presence it is the most desirable thing, this joy. V'nimtza afilu melechet hamishkan, sheyaseh davar tzarich elav sheyeh mishkan laHashem, gam zeh memait v'Shabbat. And that's even melechet hamishkan, even that which you have to do to become a mishkan for God, you're not supposed to be working on Shabbat. V'zeh lemait Shabbat afilu melechet hamishkan, shu letzorach hamishkan. So that's why the first day of Pesach is Shabbat. Nothing to work on. You don't have to struggle. You are there. You are liberated. You are free. It's not, I'm inadequate for this freedom. It's not, I don't deserve this freedom. It's not, I'm not good enough. It's none of that. It's just celebrating the freedom. And that's why we Macharat Shabbat. But the day after that Shabbat, you begin counting the Omer. So these two sides of, in some ways, what religious life is about. The religious life, which is this great moment of discovering the divine presence and the gates of heaven open to you, and you see everything, and then the religious life that's about struggle and growth and building and adequacy, and how they nourish and feed into one another. And I think that, again, to repeat my answer to Micah's question, I think important question. I think it's the moment of insight that gives us the inspiration that allows us to get through the hard slog of what it means to struggle to become a better human being.